My father-in-law tried to humiliate me at a formal Navy dinner, insinuating I was a diversity hire in front of my superiors. He thought I was just a civilian pencil pusher. So I used my research skills to find the dishonorable discharge he'd buried for 40 years and exposed him at his own gala. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The ballroom was a sea of dark blue and white uniforms, the crispness of the dress mess uniforms almost audible over the low hum of conversation. I smoothed the front of my midnight blue evening gown, my palms clammy. This wasn't my world, not really. I built ships, or rather, I designed the complex systems that made them the most advanced vessels on the planet. I was Dr. Alina Hansen, a civilian naval architect, and tonight the Navy League was honoring me with the Maritime Innovation Award. My husband, Mark, squeezed my hand, his own palm a bit damp. He was nervous for me, but I wasn't nervous about the award. I was nervous about the guest we'd brought with us, my father-in-law, Arthur Vance. Arthur, retired CEO and patriarch of an old-money manufacturing fortune, was holding court at our table, his voice a booming baritone that always seemed to find its way across a crowded room. He was telling a story to a young lieutenant who looked politely trapped. Arthur loved anything to do with the military, but in a way that always felt proprietary, and to me, deeply inauthentic. He spoke of patriotism and service as if they were commodities his family had cornered the market on. "Elena, darling," he'd said earlier as we entered, his eyes gliding over my gown with faint disapproval. "You look presentable. Do try not to talk about fluid dynamics tonight. It bores people." Mark had given a weak chuckle. "Dad, she's the one winning the award." Yes, of course," Arthur had said, already scanning the room for someone more important to talk to. Now the dinner was concluding. A rear admiral was at the podium, reading my introduction. Dr. Hansen's work on the new destroyer class has revolutionized our carrier strike group's defense capabilities, her innovative approach to hydrodynamic stability. I felt a flush of pride. This was my life's work. This was what I had poured my heart and soul into for 20 years. My parents, both public school teachers, would have been so proud. I stood and walked to the stage, the applause warm and genuine. I accepted the heavy glass trophy, my hands shaking slightly as I gave my brief, prepared thanks, making sure to credit my team. I felt Mark's proud gaze from the table, but I also felt Arthur's. His was heavy, cold, and appraising. I returned to my seat, the adrenaline fading, replaced by a quiet glow of accomplishment. The admiral who had presented the award was at our table, shaking my hand warmly. "Elena, your work is truly groundbreaking. We're lucky to have you." Before I could reply, Arthur raised his champagne glass, tapping it with a spoon. The table fell silent. "A toast!" he boomed, getting to his feet. He was slightly flushed from the wine, his eyes overly bright. "To my daughter-in-law, Elena." I smiled, though a knot of dread tightened in my stomach. "We are also surprised by her success," he continued, his smile oily. "It's truly wonderful what opportunities are available these days. When I was coming up, you had to, well, earn your place." He winked at the admiral. "But now, with all these diversity quotas and, shall we say, initiatives, well, it's just marvelous, a true sign of progress. It gives so many people a chance they otherwise wouldn't have had." The silence at the table was no longer polite. It was horrified. The young lieutenant's jaw was tight. The admiral's smile was frozen, his eyes like ice. Arthur had just stood up, in front of my colleagues, my superiors, and high-ranking naval officers, and announced that the only reason I was being honored was because I was a woman. He had dismissed my PhD, my 20 years of work, and my groundbreaking designs as a corporate handout. Mark beside me was pale. "Dad, sit down." "Nonsense, son, we're celebrating." Arthur beamed, utterly oblivious to the crater he had just created. He raised his glass to me. "To Elena, proving that even, well, anyone, can get a seat at the table these days." He drank, no one else did. I sat there, my face burning, the heavy glass award in my hand suddenly feeling like a prop. The Admiral cleared his throat, stood, and politely excused himself. The rest of the table followed, melting away with quiet apologies and sympathetic looks. I was left alone at the table with my husband and his father. Arthur looked genuinely confused. What? Did I say something wrong? I looked at him, the man who had passive. Lie belittled my grease monkey job for a decade. This time, it wasn't passive. It was public. It was intentional. And it was a declaration of war. I stared into his arrogant, wine-soaked eyes and felt something cold and hard settle in my chest. The humiliation was a physical thing, hot and sharp. The betrayal wasn't that he thought it. The betrayal was that he'd said it here. He hadn't just tried to humiliate me, he'd tried to humiliate me in front of the Navy. The ride home was suffocatingly silent. I sat in the back of Arthur's town car, my award in my lap, staring out the window at the blurred lights of Arlington. Mark sat beside me, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. Arthur, in the front passenger seat, hummed a jaunty, off-key tune, apparently having already forgotten the incident or, more likely, believing he'd done nothing wrong. "Well, that was a lovely party," Arthur said, turning to look at us as we pulled into our driveway. "Though the crowd was a bit stiff, didn't you think? These military types can be so self-serious." I didn't answer. I grabbed my award, opened the door before the driver could, and walked straight into the house, my heels clicking sharply on the walkway. I heard Mark murmur a hasty, "Good night, Dad," and hurry after me. I went straight to the kitchen, set the award on the counter with a heavy thud, and poured myself a glass of water, my hands still shaking. "Elena, honey," Mark started, loosening his tie. "Don't," I said, my voice quiet but dangerous. "Just don't." "He didn't mean it like that," Mark tried, a phrase I had heard at least 1,000 times over our 15-year marriage. "He's from a different generation. He thinks he's being, I don't know, charmingly old-fashioned." "Charming?" I spun around, my control snapping. "He called me a diversity hire, Mark, in front of Admiral Hayes, in front of the entire league. He didn't just insult me, he insulted the Navy's judgment and the integrity of the award. Do you have any idea how much damage he could have done to my reputation?" "I'm sure they know he was just rambling," Mark said weakly, his gaze flickering away from mine. He couldn't meet my eyes, and that somehow felt worse. He was the VP at his father's old company, still tethered to Arthur's influence, still a boy seeking approval. "He wasn't rambling, Mark. He was telling them what he's always believed, that I'm not good enough for his family, that my work is a joke, and that I'm beneath him. And you just sat there. What was I supposed to do? Tackle him? You could have said something, you could have defended me, you could have told him to shut his mouth. But you didn't, you never do." I turned away, the anger dissolving into a familiar, cold exhaustion. I felt betrayed twice over, by Arthur's malice and by Mark's weakness. The next morning, my phone rang. It was Arthur. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding with a fresh surge of adrenaline. I motioned for Mark to be quiet and answered, putting it on speaker. "Elena," Arthur's voice boomed, no trace of apology in it. "I trust you've recovered from your big night." "What do you want, Arthur's?" "I was just calling to tell Mark that the Vances have been invited to the Foundation Gala in 3 weeks. It's our biggest fundraiser of the year. I've secured us a table, front and center. I expect you to be there, of course. After what you did last night, you expect me to go anywhere with you." There was a dry chuckle on the other end. "Oh, don't be so dramatic, dear. It was a little joke. You're too sensitive. Besides, it's important for the family to present a united front. My friends and donors expect it. Your little award is nice, but this is the real world. This is about legacy." He was dismissing me. Again. He had publicly humiliated me and was now summoning me to play the part of the dutiful, smiling daughter-in-law at his event. "I'll think about it," I said icily. "There's nothing to think about," he said, his tone hardening. "You'll be there, don't embarrass Mark. Goodbye," he hung up. I looked at Mark, who was staring at the phone with a look of pained resignation. He was trapped. And in that moment, I knew he would never be the one to stand up to his father. If I wanted justice, if I wanted to reclaim the respect Arthur had tried to strip from me, I would have to do it myself. I picked up my laptop and went to my study, closing the door. The anger was gone, replaced by something else. A cold, clear, analytical focus. It was the same feeling I got when I was facing a complex engineering problem, a design flaw that seemed impossible to solve. I had built a career on finding the one tiny, overlooked detail that makes the whole system fail. Arthur Vance was an arrogant, overconfident system, and he had just invited me to find his flaw. He thought I was just some emotional woman, easily cowed. But Arthur had forgotten one crucial thing. About me, I wasn't just an architect, I was a researcher. And I was very, very good at my job. My relationship with Arthur Vance had been a cold war from the day Mark introduced me. I was a PhD student on a scholarship, working part-time in a university lab, my hands often stained with grease and hydraulic fluid. He was the CEO of Vance Manufacturing, a company that had made the same brass fittings for 100 years, and he wore his old money like armor. I'll never forget our first dinner. He looked at my calloused hands, then at Mark, and said, "A mechanic. Really, son? I thought your tastes were more refined." "She's a naval architect, Dad," Mark had mumbled, embarrassed. "Same thing, isn't it? Working with your hands, how quaint." Over the years, the slights had been constant and insidious. He called my job my little hobby. When I was promoted to lead designer on the new destroyer project, a position of immense responsibility, he'd sent me a bouquet of daisies with a card that read, "So proud of you for sticking with it," as if I'd just won a spelling bee. He flaunted his wealth and, more importantly, his legacy. His entire persona was built on a foundation of old-world patriotism. He sat on the boards of half a dozen veteran support charities, though I'd never seen him actually speak to a veteran. His office was a shrine to this image, filled with photos of him shaking hands with congressmen and posing on the decks of ships I had helped design, a fact he conveniently omitted. The most bizarre part of his persona was his own service. He never spoke of it in detail, but he allowed a fog of implication to hang in the air. When someone would thank him for his vague contributions, he would give a solemn, humble nod and say, "We all do our part for this great country." He let people assume what they wanted, cultivating an image of a man who had, like his father and grandfather, served in uniform before taking the reins of the family empire. In contrast, my life with Mark had been a partnership, but one where I felt I was always pulling the heavier load. I'd supported us while he was finding his footing in his father's company, a process that seemed to take the better part of a decade. I'd managed our finances, built our home, and poured my energy into a career I loved, all while navigating the complex social minefield of the Vance family. Mark was a good man, kind and gentle, but he was fundamentally weak, terrified of his father's disapproval. Arthur's financial and emotional control over him was absolute. Mark was a vice president, but he was still, at 43, on his father's allowance. Now, sitting in my study, the memory of Arthur's leering face as he gave that toast played on a loop in my mind. He hadn't just insulted me, he'd attacked the very foundation of my life, my intellect, my work, and my merit. He saw me as a fraud, a diversity hire, because he himself was a man built on unearned privilege. He couldn't stand that I, a woman from a family of teachers, had achieved a level of respect in a world he so desperately wanted to impress, the world of the U.S. Navy, on my own terms. My gaze fell on a framed photo on my desk. It was me, 20 years younger, on the deck of my first assignment, grinning from ear to ear. I had earned my place. I had worked through sleepless nights, navigated a male-dominated field, and fought for every bit of respect I had. And I would not let a pompous, insecure bully like Arthur Vance take that away from me. My anger from the night before had cooled and hardened into something far more dangerous: resolve. I opened my laptop. Arthur's entire life was curated. His image as a patriot was his armor. I was going to find the chink in it. He wanted to see me as a grease monkey? Fine. It was time to take his carefully constructed engine apart, piece by piece, and find the flaw. My profession wasn't just about design, it was about forensics. When a system fails, I am the one they call to find out why. I trace the problem back to its origin, through thousands of lines of code and blueprints, until I find the single, catastrophic error. I started with the vague stories of his service. He was 68. That would put his service time, if any, in the early to mid-1970s. I began with the National Archives, public records. It was a long shot, many records were not digitized, but Arthur Vance was a man of ego, he'd have left a trace. I searched enlistment records, and there it was, Arthur J. Vance. Enlisted, U.S. Army, 1975. My breath caught, so he had served. I kept digging. I searched military databases, looking for discharge records, and that's when I found the first anomaly. His service was listed. Enlistment date, June 1975. Discharge date, October 1975. 4 months. You don't complete basic training and AIT in 4 months. A standard enlistment was 3 years. This wasn't a service record, it was a blip. It wasn't an honorable discharge. Or he'd have a DD-214 to brag about. It wasn't medical, or he'd be playing the wounded warrior card. It was something else. Something he had spent 40 years hiding. A cold smile touched my lips. I found it, I whispered. I didn't know what it was yet, but I had the thread. The patriot, who loved to lecture everyone on service, had lasted barely 120 days. Now, the real investigation began. The next few days were a blur of intense, focused work. By day, I was Dr. Hansen, lead architect, reviewing schematics for a new littoral combat ship. By night, I was a detective, pulling on the thread of Arthur Vance's past. The 4-month service record was the key. A discharge that fast, not for medical reasons, almost always meant one thing: trouble. A simple public records search wasn't enough. Many of these records, especially disciplinary ones, were sealed or archived deep in physical storage. I needed help. I thought back to the dinner, to the faces of the officers who had looked at me with such sympathy. One of them, a retired JAG officer named Captain Miller, had given me his card. If you ever need anything, Dr. Hansen, anything at all, that man's behavior was unacceptable. I'd hesitated, but the memory of Arthur's smug face as he hung up on me finalized my decision. This wasn't just personal. Arthur had used his support for the Navy as a shield. He had insulted me in front of them. I called Miller. Captain Miller, this is Alina Hansen. I have a strange and sensitive request. I explained. I didn't frame it as revenge. I framed it as a security concern. Arthur Vance sits on the board of several prominent Navy-adjacent charities, I said, my voice steady. He implies a service history that I'm finding discrepancies with. He used his perceived status to try and discredit my work. It makes me wonder what else about his persona is fraudulent. Miller was quiet for a moment. I see, he said, his voice clipped and professional. A man who builds his reputation on a lie, especially one tied to the service, is a liability. Give me the details you have. I'll make some inquiries through the proper channels. This will be discreet. While Miller worked his magic, I turned my attention to Mark. He was moping around the house, torn between his shame at my treatment and his ingrained fear of his father. Alina, the gala is next week, he said one evening nervously. Dad called again. He's insistent. I'm sure he is, I said, not looking up from my laptop. Maybe we should just go, he sighed. Get it over with, keep the peace. Keep the peace? I finally looked at him. Mark, there is no peace. There is you, and there is me, and there is your father, who is actively trying to destroy my credibility. Whose side are you on? It's not about sides, Alina. It's family. It is exactly about sides, I snapped, and you need to pick one. He flinched, and I saw the familiar retreat in his eyes. He couldn't, he was too weak. I felt a pang of pity for him, but it was quickly eclipsed by my resolve. I couldn't count on him. This was my fight. 2 days later, a cryptic email landed in my inbox from Captain Miller. Dr. Hansen, I believe I have the information you requested. It is, as you suspected, a matter of public record, though one that has been deeply buried. I am sending a file to your secure P.O. box. What you do with it is, of course, your own concern. I left work early, my heart hammering. I picked up the thick manila envelope and didn't open it until I was back in my locked study. Inside was a stack of photocopied documents, a military police report, a summary of a court-martial, and the final, damning document. Vance Arthur J. discharge status, dishonorable. My eyes scanned the text. It wasn't a youthful indiscretion. It was a calculated crime. Arthur, barely 20 years old, had been assigned to the quartermaster's office at his basic training post. Over a period of 2 months, he had systematically falsified supply requisitions, stealing over $10,000 worth of equipment, radios, tools, and supplies, and selling them to a civilian pawn shop off base. He was caught trying to sell a crate of high-end binoculars. The fraud was so blatant, so arrogant, that the commander had pushed for the harshest possible penalty. He was convicted of theft of government property and fraud. He served 6 months in the stockade before being dishonorably discharged. This was his service. This was the patriot. The man who looked down on me, who built his legacy on honor, was a common thief who had stolen from his fellow soldiers. I sat back, the papers in my hand. This was more than a chink in his armor. This was a tactical nuclear weapon. My first instinct was to show Mark. To finally make him see his father for who he was. I found him in the living room, reading a magazine. "Mark," I said, my voice shaking slightly, "you need to see this." I handed him the file. He read it, his face growing paler with every page. He read the police report. He read the conviction. He read the words, dishonorable discharge. He dropped the papers on the coffee table as if they were on fire. "Where did you get this?" he whispered, his voice horrified. "Does it matter? It's true." This is a mistake. It has to be." He was shaking his head in denial. "My father, he wouldn't." "He did, Mark. He's a thief. He's a fraud. His entire life, his entire platform of honor and patriotism is a lie. This is the man you're so afraid of disappointing." You can't use this, Alina," he said, his eyes wide with panic. "This would destroy him. It would destroy the family name, the company, the foundation." "He tried to destroy me," I said, my voice cold as ice. "He did it in public without a second thought. He called me a fraud in a room full of admirals. But this is different. This is his past. My God, Alina, what are you planning to do?" I looked at my husband, at this man so thoroughly broken by his father's expectations, and I felt nothing but a cold distance. "I'm planning," I said, picking up the papers, "to go to the gala." The panic in Mark's eyes was real. He spent the next 48 hours following me around the house, begging me not to do whatever it was I was planning. "Alina, please," he pleaded. "Think about what this will do. Think about the family. Think about me. If you do this, he'll cut me off. He'll cut us off. We'll lose everything." "What everything, Mark?" I asked, not unkindly. "The house is in my name. My salary pays our mortgage. My connections are my own. What exactly will we lose? Your title at a company you hate, an inheritance you've been groveling for your entire adult life." He had no answer. I knew a direct confrontation with Arthur was necessary, but not for the reason Mark thought. I didn't want to give him a chance to apologize. I wanted to see his reaction. I wanted to confirm the kill. The opportunity came at the weekly Sunday brunch Arthur insisted on. It was a tense, miserable affair at the best of times. This time, it was electric. Mark was ashen. I was a coiled spring. Arthur, oblivious as ever, was holding court about his upcoming gala. "And the lieutenant governor just confirmed," Arthur was saying, savoring his coffee. "It's going to be the event of the season, a true testament to this family's commitment to, Well, to doing things the right way. I placed my coffee cup down with a very deliberate, quiet click. The table fell silent. Arthur, I said, my voice pleasant, I was doing some research for a historical project I'm consulting on, about naval history, and it led me down a rabbit hole of military records. It's fascinating what you can find in the archives. Arthur's smile twitched. Is that so? How dull? Not at all, I continued, leaning forward slightly. For instance, I was looking into service records from the 1970s, specifically around 1975, Fort Jackson. The blood drained from Arthur's face. His hand, holding his coffee cup, began to tremble. He set it down, rattling the saucer. Mark looked like he was going to be sick. I don't know what you're talking about, Arthur said, his voice suddenly a few octaves higher. I'm talking about your service, Arthur, I said, my voice still light, conversational. The one you never quite talk about. I was just so curious. And I found it. The whole story, quartermaster's office, supply requisitions, a court-martial. Arthur shot to his feet, his chair scraping violently against the floor. How dare you, he roared, his face turning a blotchy, furious red. You little snake, digging into my private life. Was it private when you were stealing from your fellow soldiers? I asked, my voice flat. Lies, he shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at me. You're trying to blackmail me. I'll have you arrested. I'll have you blacklisted. You'll never work for the Navy again. I'll call my friends. I'll destroy you. You'll be ruined. It was exactly the reaction I'd expected. The poorly executed threats, the sputtering rage, the immediate escalation to I'll destroy you. He wasn't a powerful man. He was a cornered, pathetic bully. He hadn't denied it. He had confirmed everything. Sit down, Arthur, I said, my voice commanding. You're making a scene. Get out, he screamed. Get out of my house, and you, he rounded on Mark, if you leave with this. This filth, you are no son of mine, you'll be cut off. Do you hear me? Not a penny. Mark was frozen, his face a mask of terror. He looked at his father, then at me. I stood up calmly, folding my napkin and placing it on the table. I'll see you at the gala, Arthur. You're right. It is important for the family to present a united front. I turned and walked out. I didn't look back to see if Mark was following me. I didn't need to, he heard his footsteps pounding on the pavement behind me as I got to my car. He scrambled into the passenger seat, breathing hard as I started the engine. He said nothing the entire way home. The first confrontation was over. The spell was broken. Now it was time to build the case. The week leading up to the gala was the quietest our house had ever been. Mark was a ghost. He went to work, he came home, he ate his dinner in silence, and he went to bed. The terror of the brunch confrontation had settled into a kind of horrified paralysis. He was caught between the two strongest forces in his life, and he had finally realized that one of them was a fraud and the other was me. Arthur, on the other hand, was desperate. The day after the brunch, my personal cell phone rang. It was an old friend of Arthur's, a lawyer on retainer for Vance Manufacturing. Dr. Hanson, the man's oily voice began. Mr. Vance has informed me of some deeply unfortunate misunderstandings. He's aware that you've come across some sealed and likely falsified records from his youth. He's prepared to be generous to ensure this youthful indiscretion is not further misunderstood. Are you trying to bribe me? I asked, pulling my car over. I'm trying to offer a resolution, Doctor, a very significant one. Mr. Vance is prepared to set up a trust for you and Mark. Let's say 7 figures, in exchange for your silence and, of course, the return of those inaccurate documents. So it wasn't just threats, it was bribery. He was confirming, yet again, that the documents were real and that he was terrified. Tell Arthur, I said, that my price is public. I'll see him at the gala. I hung up. The stakes were clear. He was trying to buy my silence. He was trying to regain control. I knew he'd be turning the screws on Mark, telling him I was a gold digger, that I was trying to extort the family. And I knew Mark, in his weakened state, might even start to believe it. I needed to end this, and I needed to do it for Mark as much as for myself. He needed to be free. I spent the next 2 days solidifying my case. I didn't just have the court-martial documents. I used my research skills to find more. I tracked down the name of the base commander who had signed the discharge papers. He was long retired, living in Florida. I found a phone number. I called him. "Colonel Mathers," I said, "my name is Dr. Alina Hansen. I'm a historian, and I'm researching a very specific case from Fort Jackson, 1975. It concerns a trainee named Arthur Vance." There was a long silence. "Vance," the old man's voice crackled. "My God, I haven't heard that name in 40 years. That arrogant, thieving boy, what about him?" I explained that Vance was now a pillar of the community, a patriot who ran a major veterans foundation. The colonel let out a short, harsh laugh. "A patriot? That boy was a disgrace. He stole from his own platoon, sold off supplies meant for his brothers in arms. He was the worst kind of coward. We threw the book at him, and I'd do it again. I still have my copy of the file." "Why?" "Would you be willing," I asked, "to write a statement to that effect, for the good of the veterans he claims to support?" "I'll have it notarized and overnighted," he said. 2 days before the gala, the envelope from Colonel Mathers arrived. It was a scathing, 2-page condemnation of Arthur's character, his crimes, and his utter lack of honor, all on the colonel's official letterhead. That night, I found Mark sitting in the dark in our living room. "Mark," I said gently, sitting across from him, "I know this has been hell for you. I know you love your father, or at least you love the idea of him." He called me," Mark whispered, his voice hoarse. "He said you tried to blackmail him. He said you demanded money. He offered to forgive me if I left you." "I know," I said. "He offered me money too. I turned him down." "I don't know what to believe," he said, putting his head in his hands. "My whole life it's falling apart." "Your father is a liar, Mark," I said, my voice firm but kind. "He's not just a casual liar, he's a professional one. His entire life is a performance." He said it was a mistake, a youthful error. "It wasn't," I said. I handed him the file from Captain Miller. And on top of it, I placed the notarized letter from Colonel Mathers. "Read this," I said. "This is from the man who signed his discharge." Mark read the letter. He read it once. Then he read it again. The words on the page, thief, disgrace, coward, utter lack of honor, sank in. This wasn't an abstract file. This was a personal testimony from the man who was there. He looked up at me, and for the first time, the fear in his eyes was gone. It was replaced by a slow-burning, cold anger. The spell, which had been cracked at brunch, was now irrevocably shattered. He finally saw the real Arthur Vance, not a powerful patriarch, but a apathetic, aging fraud. "The gala," he said, his voice quiet. "We're going." "Yes," I said, "we are." "He needs to be stopped," Mark said, more to himself than to me. "All these years, all these people. He's been lying to all of them." "Yes, he has." Mark stood up, his shoulders back for the first time in a week. He walked over to me and took my hand. "I'm sorry, Alina. I'm so sorry for not believing you, for not defending you, for being so weak." "I'm here," I said, squeezing his hand. "I know," he said, his eyes meeting mine. "Now I am too." The Vance Family Foundation Gala was everything Arthur had promised, an ostentatious display of wealth and self-importance. The ballroom of the city's most expensive hotel was dripping with crystal and flowers. Hundreds of people, politicians, society figures, and local business leaders, mingled, blissfully unaware of the lie at the center of it all. Arthur was in his element, standing near the stage, accepting praise, his chest puffed out in his tuxedo. He spotted us as we walked in. Mark's hand was firmly on the small of my back. When Arthur saw us, his smile faltered, his eyes narrowing. He saw Mark's expression, no longer fearful but cold and resolute, and he knew. This was not the capitulation he had hoped for. This was a declaration. We took our seats at the front table, polite and silent. We nodded at the other guests. We ate our dinner. I felt strangely calm. The research was done. The variable was secured. This was just the final presentation of findings. After dessert, Arthur took the stage to a round of thunderous applause. The spotlight hit him, and he bathed in it. Thank you, he said, his voice oozing false humility. Friends, partners, patriots, we are here tonight for one reason: to support the brave men and women of our armed forces, to give back to those who have sacrificed everything for this great nation. He launched into his favorite speech, the one I had heard a dozen times, about honor, duty, and service. It's a code, he boomed, that we in the Vance family have lived by for generations. It's not something you can learn from a book. And here, his eyes found mine in the crowd, or in a classroom. It's something you live. It's about character. It's about knowing what it means to put on the uniform and stand for something greater than yourself. He was painting his own portrait, and it was glorious. He was building his pedestal higher and higher. There are some in this world, he continued, a sneer touching his lips, who only understand balance sheets, who think success is measured in academic papers or diversity awards. A few of his cronies chuckled. They don't understand sacrifice. They don't understand honor. This was it. He had opened the door. I stood up. The room, sensing a disturbance, quieted. Arthur stopped, mid-speech, glaring at me. Elena, please sit down. This is not the time for. You're right, Arthur, I said, my voice clear and carrying in the sudden hush. The hotel's AV team, thinking this was part of the program, adjusted my microphone level. It is exactly the time. You speak so movingly about honor and service. I was hoping you would finally share the details of your own. The room was tomb silent. Arthur's face went from red to white. I don't know what you mean. Of course you do, I said calmly. I took the folded papers from my evening bag, the court-martial summary and Colonel Mather's letter. You talk about putting on the uniform. You did, didn't you? In June of 1975. Elena, Mark said, not as a warning but as a cue. He stood up beside me. You were at Fort Jackson, I continued, my voice resonant, in the quartermaster's office. But you didn't serve, did you, Arthur? You stole. A collective gasp went through the room. Lies, Arthur shouted from the stage, his voice cracking. She's a disgruntled, lying. Am I? I held up the first document. This is the summary of your court-martial for theft of government property. You stole radios and supplies from your own platoon and sold them at a pawn shop. You were convicted. I held up the second document. And this is a notarized letter from your commanding officer, Colonel Mathers, U.S. Army, retired. He calls you, and I quote, a disgrace, a thief with an utter lack of honor. I looked out at the sea of shocked faces, at the donors, at the lieutenant governor. This is your patriot. This is the man you're writing checks to. He wasn't honorably discharged. He was dishonorably discharged. He served 6 months in the stockade for being a common criminal. Arthur was speechless, his mouth opening and closing, his face a mask of purple rage and absolute humiliation. His entire, carefully constructed world had just been vaporized. The room was silent for a beat. Then the whispering started, a tidal wave of scandal. Mark stepped forward, his voice clear and strong, filled why. A power I had never heard from him. My father is a fraud, he announced to the room. He has been lying to all of you and to his family for 40 years. My wife, Dr. Elena Hansen, is the most honorable, brilliant, and honest person I have ever known. She earned her award. She earned her reputation. And he tried to destroy her because he was terrified she would expose him. He turned to the stage, looking his father dead in the eye. We're leaving, and we are never, ever coming back. Enjoy your party, Mr. Vance. Mark took my hand. We turned our backs on the stage, on the wreckage of Arthur's life, and walked out of the ballroom. As the doors closed behind us, the roar of 100 conversation-stirred scandal erupted. But all I could hear was the sound of our footsteps, walking together into the quiet night. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. The Vance Family Foundation Gala didn't just end, it imploded. By the next morning, the lieutenant governor had issued a statement condemning fraudulent representation in charitable organizations. Half the board resigned by noon. The local society pages, which had been preparing to print a glowing puff piece on Arthur, gleefully switched to a full-blown scandal, complete with leaked whispers of a dishonorable discharge. Arthur became a pariah overnight. The old money crowd, which values public image above all else, shut him out completely. His friends suddenly wouldn't take his calls. The veterans' charities he'd sat on all issued quiet statements, reviewing their board memberships. And within a week, his name was scrubbed from their websites. His entire life, built on a foundation of lies, had been demolished by a few simple, well-researched facts. Mark, for his part, was a changed man. The day after the gala, he walked into his father's company, the company he had been groomed to inherit, and tendered his resignation. He walked out with nothing but his personal items in a box and, for the first time, his dignity. Our reconciliation was quiet but profound. That night, he found me in my study, where I was looking at the blueprints for my next project. "Elena," he said, leaning against the doorframe, I don't know how to thank you." "Thank me for what?" I asked. For setting me free," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've been a passenger in my own life, a coward. I let him treat you that way. I was so afraid of losing a legacy that I didn't even realize it was built on poison." He crossed the room and took my hands, pulling me up from my chair. "I am so proud of you. You are the strongest person I have ever known, and I promise you I will spend the rest of my life being the man you deserve." And he did. Mark, free from his father's shadow, found his own path. He took a job with a small, local nonprofit, one that actually did help people, and for the first time he was happy. He was present. He was my partner. As for me, my reputation at the Navy was only enhanced. The story of the gala spread, though in the hushed, respectful tones of military gossip. I was no longer just the brilliant architect. I was the woman who had, with surgical precision and quiet dignity, exposed a major fraud. Admiral Hayes sent me a personal note. "Dr. Hansen," it read, "honor is not always loud. Sometimes it is the quiet, diligent pursuit of the truth. Well done." We heard, through the grapevine, that Arthur had become a recluse, selling his mansion and moving to an apartment, his social and financial world in ruins. He had lost everything that mattered to him: his name, his status, and his son. Months later, Mark and I attended another Navy League dinner. This time, I wasn't just an awardee, I was a guest of honor at the Admiral's table. As I sat there, surrounded by people I respected, my hand in Mark's, I felt a sense of profound peace. The humiliation of that night seemed a lifetime ago. Arthur had tried to make me small, to make me feel like a fraud. But in the end, he had only succeeded in proving his own fraudulence to the world. The truth, like a well-designed ship, is built to last. It can withstand any storm. And, as Arthur Vance learned, it always, always comes to the surface.